Hello and welcome to another of my interview series. Welcome back to the channel. Now, I was minding my own business, doing my own thing, catching up with emails, and a phone call rang to the house. And you know what it's like. You run to the phone, find out who it is, and this gentleman, very nice gentleman, got in touch and he said, "Richard, I want to pull you up on a few points about common law." And I thought, oh, here we go. So I settled myself down on the foot of the stairs where my phone is, and I spoke to a very nice chap, as I say, Albert, who I've since said, well, let's get you on the show and find out all about it. Hello, Albert, and thank you so much for getting in touch with me.
Now, hello there, Richard.
It's lovely to have you on the show because I think in some of the things that you were questioning some of my guests about what common law is and have a slightly different take, and I'm open to all the different interpretations of this because I think it's just fair that we all get a good look at it from all different sides.
Yeah. Well, common law has two points of origin, really. One is the before we were England, when we were lots of little kingdoms called Britain, each kingdom had its own set of laws. And one part of our common law is the bits of common law which were common to every single kingdom. For example, murder was common to every single kingdom. So if you're charged with murder today, you're charged with murder at common law, because basically this is a seriously open ancient law. And there are one or two other bits and pieces. Breach of the peace, again, is common law. But common law is much more than that. The second source for common law is where judges have been hearing a case and the law as it's written didn't quite suit what they were hearing. So the judges then tweaked the law to suit the case so that at the end of the day, what they got was justice. Now, we haven't always had justice. Alfred the Great had a couple of judges, one of whom he stopped the trial and just hung the bloke anyway. Another one, the jury verdict wasn't complete. It was a 9-3 verdict. And so basically the judge sacked the three and interviewed another three and found three more who would agree that it was guilty. And so they came in with their verdict and he hung them. Alfred the Great didn't like that idea very much, so he hung both the judges. I think at the end of the day, Alfred the Great hung about 40 judges because they were breaching the law as it was intended to be.
Right.
And which is why probably today we are acknowledged as having honest and honourable judges, because basically Alfred the Great taught the lesson very early on.
Yes.
That if you break the law and you hang people that you shouldn't, then you're going to hang as well.
Yeah, quite right.
So
can I just I don't want to interrupt too much. I try not to. I try to let all the guests have their say. And sometimes people do actually just criticise me and they say, "Oh, Richard, you don't pull people up or you don't question them too much." And I just say that I don't consider myself a journalist in the way that you would at the BBC. Is there, in your opinion, is there a difference then between common law, because we get all these different sort of phrases, between common law, God's law, natural law, and common law?
What we have in this country are a series of types of law. We have common law.
Yes.
We have custom.
Yes.
And this is where a law has been in use for a period of 400 years or more.
Yes.
With the approval of the people that use the law. That's you and I.
Right.
That's the custom. Now, custom, it becomes the custom and practice of England to exercise law in this particular manner. Now, custom is basically sacrosanct. It cannot be amended, it can't be altered or anything else, because it is the established law of England, the way the people want it. And at the end of the day, a lot of your people who talk about common law, they say, "Oh, of course we have, we have the right to decide ourselves," and to a certain extent, that's true. Um, so we have common law, we have custom, we then have statute law. Now, everybody that I talk to seems to feel that our first ever law was common law, insofar as it was the old laws from the old kingdoms, which were common to every kingdom. That is fairly true. However, Alfred the Great, when he became king, he looked at all of the laws in the old kingdoms that made up his kingdom, and he selected what he thought was the best, and he wrote them down in a book called the Dome. If there's anybody out there who ever finds a copy of the Dome, you are wealthy beyond measure, because the Dome has not been seen since Edward IV.
Right. Okay.
There are no copies known to be in existence. However,
do we know what's in it, though?
Pardon?
Do we know what's in it?
Well, Alfred's laws, basically. Every law of Alfred's, the legal codes of Alfred.
Yes. What I'm saying is, if the book has disappeared, do we know what was in it?
Yeah, we know exactly what was in it,
right?
Because
okay.
It's recorded in other places. But
right.
But basically, an actual copy of the Dome is they just can't find one anywhere.
Yes.
So basically, Alfred then showed the Dome to the Witan, which was his parliament, and he said to them, "Is this good law?" And they agreed it was good law, and they promulgated it as Alfred's law.
Could you just explain who the Witan are for people who don't know?
The Witan were a series of people, a number of people who advised Alfred on policies and things like that, as to basically how to run the country. So the Witan was a very early form of parliament. They weren't elected as MPs as such. They were just important people, or people with a particular knowledge that Alfred needed. And he would call them in, and they'd sit down and they'd have a chat, much like they're supposed to do in Parliament today, but don't. And basically, they then promulgated the Dome as Alfred's law throughout the whole of England, or Alfred's England. His grandson promulgated it throughout the whole of England when he became king. Now, basically, this means that our first ever purely English law was in fact statute law, not common law. It was statute law. Now, you get a lot of people saying statute law is not the law, it's just rule, or it's a regulation or whatever. That's wrong. Statute law is proper law. It has the full force of law. It can be enforced as law. The only requirement for a statute law is that it must comply with the spirit of the common law. So, the common law is designed and very clearly is a set of laws which look after our interests as individuals and as a collective society. But so any law which doesn't in fact comply with the spirit of the common law, in fact, is a bad law. And according to Chief Justice Fortescue in 1420, there's no such thing as a bad law, for if it's bad, it's not law. Now,
so can I just ask then if a couple of things on that, because you're asserting that the legislation is law. Somewhere somebody's got to have given them power to have made that argument.
Well, we gave them the power when we send our members of Parliament to Parliament.
Yes, no, but I'm talking right back in the
But it was the same then, because the Witan was the Parliament, and they would discuss this sort of stuff all the time.
So who would give them the power?
Well, in a lot of cases, they got the power because they were important people in the area where they lived. They were the more intelligent, maybe the richest.
But But does
And
that give them the? Does that give them? I suppose what I'm trying to get to. Does that give them the right to make rules for everybody else, just
well,
because they
we have
are?
to understand that we're talking about an entirely different period of history.
Mm,
And at that time, the king had ultimate power. Um, and we got our kings because as the various little kingdoms were fighting one another, um, before they were kingdoms, one of the people who was part of that kingdom would stand out as being a particularly good general. So he would then be put in charge of their armies when they went to war.
mm,
Um, when they won all their battles, and eventually the people decided, well, you know, why don't we make him a king? Why don't we make him a king? Um, so they then elected him, the people themselves elected him as the king. Now, we get an awful lot of stuff on the internet today about um, the king being, or the queen as it was, being the biggest benefit scrounger in the world. Um, that's not entirely true because the people themselves, when they'd elected Harry from number 34 to be king, the people themselves decided that the king must be visibly higher than everybody else. Otherwise, no point in being king, is there? Um, and so the people themselves decided that they would give the king 6 times the amount of land
mm.
than the richest person had, and they would give him 6 times the money that the richest person had. But in the first instance, the people said to the king, well, we're giving you this land and we're giving you this money, but it's a one off. It is a one off. You have to fund the office of being a king from the profits that you make out of that land.
Yes.
Now, we now call this the crown estates. As kingdoms beat other kingdoms and co-opted them in, the crown estates got bigger because the king that had just lost the battle, his property went to the king that had won it. So eventually, the king, in fact, of the whole of England, then had an awful lot of real estate scattered around the country, all of which was earning money. Now, that's still the case today. The crown estates are still earning money.
Mm.
Now, every king of ours since George III has donated the profits from the crown estates to the exchequer. The last time I have figures for would be 2015. And in 2015, the profits from the crown estate were £375 million. Now, Queen Elizabeth, out of the kindness of her heart, she donated that money. She didn't have to, it's her money. Donated that money to the exchequer completely, the complete profits. And the understanding being that the exchequer would then refund her some money so that she could run the office of the crown. Now, the exchequer then refunded her £40 million to run the office of the crown, which means that Queen Elizabeth, out of the kindness of her heart, gave us £335 million. Which she didn't have to do because it's her money, and King Charles could turn around and say when he gets crowned, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to keep the profits for myself, because the crown estates belong directly to the office of the crown, which is administered by the current king.
Are they
Now,
taxed?
pardon?
Are they taxed?
No, they weren't taxed, but Queen Elizabeth agreed they could tax. And so her £40 million that she got back, she agreed they could tax that.
Right.
But again, King Charles could change that if he wanted to. I don't think he will because, as far as I'm concerned, King Charles, from what he has done so far, is a complete and utter waste of space. He's far too woke. He's far too. He's not English enough, if you know what I mean. He's not English enough. He doesn't think about what's best for his subjects.
Yes.
He thinks about what's best for everybody, wherever they come from, whatever they are doing. You know, so we could import, and we do import, some of the world's nastiest people into this country.
Yes.
And Parliament have made laws, and the European Union have made laws, which Parliament have accepted, which make it virtually impossible for us to get rid of them. You know.
Yeah. So I mean, what you've described so far seems to be a society that has been, in the early days, taken by force. And although people have said, "Oh, this leader is quite good, we'll have him," we still seem to be. They seem
Well,
to have been led by threats and menaces back
well,
then.
not no, no,
And
no.
then, hang on. And now we're still in the same situation where the members of parliament are still basically leading by threats and menaces. And we have a king, as you so rightly say, that may or may not be as benevolent as he should be. And we're all waiting to see what happens with the oath. And we have a monarchy that you described there with the past queen, who hasn't been taxed and is above everybody else. And
Well,
I suppose my previous guests, who you were criticising when you phoned me, were saying there are sort of basic principles of life for every citizen. Not citizen, that's the wrong word. Every living person. Person's the wrong word. Every living man and woman in our society and maybe across the world. There are certain things that should be divinely ours, which may be called natural law or God's law, in which the rules and regulations, which I agree we need something cohesive to all agree on and live by, but threats and menaces and a society in which you can't challenge all of that is not very conducive for people.
It isn't. I agree with you. But if we look at the origins of law, where does it come from? And I say, look, if you've got a bit of a river with some nice fish in it, the bloke's there and he's fishing. Somebody else comes along and thinks, oh, it's a nice bit of river. He's pulling a lot of fish out. I'm going to fish here too. And then the two of them have a fight because they both want to get the fish out of that bit of river. Eventually, they would decide together, well, there's no point in fighting, so let's have an agreement here. I'll fish this little section here. You can go 100 yards north of me and you fish that bit. And so they learn to live together. And basically, that's the origins of law. It's learning to live together.
So in your dispute there, would you not say that if they're fighting against each other, they may be, as so many people are, only interested in their interest and not really the other person's interest?
Oh, that's absolutely true.
So that you would bring in perhaps a system of other people to judge whether it was right he could fish there and he could fish,
absolutely,
which you might call trial by jury.
Absolutely, but originally, society, certainly around about the period of Alfred the Great, society was set up into little groups of 12 households, and that was called a tithing. And the tithing would then have their own set of rules that they would live by, and every year they would have an election, and they would elect somebody to be called the tithing man. Now, the tithing man is our very earliest policeman, and it was his job to make sure that if Harry from number 35 broke the law, then he had to bring Harry before the tithing, which is the 12 households, which probably is the reason we have 12 members of a jury. So basically, and then the tithing would sit down, they'd listen to what the tithing man had said about what Harry had done. They'd talk to Harry about it, and then they would decide whether Harry was worthy of punishment or not. And if he was, what that punishment would be. Now, in the early days, punishment was always by fine. It was always by fine. The only crime that Alfred the Great had where hanging was the standard punishment was treason against the crown. That was the only law. And basically, the rest of them were by fine. Now, if you killed a common man like your local shepherd, you might get fined 20 quid. But if you killed the baron, the earl, then you get fined 200 quid, depending upon that person's station in life. Now,
which seems
that may well seem to be an unfair system because
yes,
all life is equal, isn't it?
Well,
but nevertheless, it was a system that they had, and basically, it worked. It did work. If you went to somebody's house,
But it worked for who though?
well, it worked for everybody. It worked for everybody.
Apart from the
Um,
shepherd who was murdered for 20 quid.
yeah, well, apart from the shepherd, but then he was dead anyway, so he had no further interest in the matter.
No, but
But
his family. I suppose what I'm trying to get to is the principles behind
the
this, rather
principle
than the
behind it was
the.
that his family would get what was the considered worth of a shepherd's
Yes. Okay.
in that day.
You see, the
Um,
problem I see is that we've got a series of facts which proves where we are today because we can follow history, but it doesn't necessarily mean that history, just because that happened, doesn't necessarily mean it's right for where we are today, and that the principles, I suppose, of natural law, where you do no harm as a very beginning starting point, and then you put in a structure which enables people to live together, whether that be a constitution, convention, whatever it is. But if you've got a system that ultimately is being run by just because I've got a bigger sword or bigger muscles, and you must do as I say, and you're not worth anything, and this bloke is worth something, and then that carries on through history.
I think that's a very simplistic way of putting it. I don't think it actually worked like that. I mean, the object of the exercise was that everybody could live a reasonably safe life.
And I'm
And
not I'm not actually, see, I don't want to get argumentative, but I'm not disagreeing with you on the events that happened and it may have worked. I suppose I'm looking at the underlining principle
yeah,
of saying, whilst that's true that did happen,
if
we are where we are now as a result of history.
if we come up to where we are now, where we have a group of politicians who sit in Parliament, we elect them, they go there, and they sit in Parliament and they make the rules up.
Mm.
Now, originally, the king would call a parliament when something important came up. Maybe there was a war coming and he needed money to fight it. Maybe there was a famine and he needed to find out what to do about it. And he would call for a parliament. So parliaments met irregularly at the request of the king. Nowadays, of course, that in fact meant that only those laws which were important at that time were enacted. But nowadays, of course, we elect 635 members of parliament. They go to Parliament every day. They are supposed to, and they sit down and they twiddle in their thumbs with nothing to do. And the trouble with having nothing to do is people don't like having nothing to do, so they make idiot laws. For example, if we take the Race Relations Act, the Race Relations Act is an idiot law. It's a bad law. I don't like it because it places one section of society and a position of advantage over another. So if I was to throw a brick through your window and say, or through a black man's window and say, throw a brick through the window, that's criminal damage. If I then scream out something of a racist nature, that becomes aggravated criminal damage under our law, right? So our law already covered what the Race Relations Act does. So the Race Relations Act was superfluous law and wasn't needed. A lot of our laws are not needed. A lot of the things that we do in the Road Traffic Act, for example, Road Traffic Act complies with the spirit of the common law. That's fair enough. It's there designed to prevent loss of life and damage to property. That's what it's designed to do. And by and large, it does that. However, where you get things like coming along, like you're driving without insurance, then they seize your car. That seizure of your car is illegal under the Bill of Rights. It's illegal under Magna Carta, major constitutional laws. Now, the difference between every other law and a constitutional law is that a constitutional law is where the people have sat down with the king and they've decided what they want to talk about, and then they talk about it, and then they get the agreement of the king to rule them in that particular manner. At Magna Carta, we see an awful lot of people saying, "Oh, well, that only applies to the barons because the barons were the only ones there." That's not true. King John was extremely unpopular. He was unpopular with the barons because what he was doing is, if you've got a good-looking wife, he'd say to your wife, "Well, you've got to come and go sleep with me tonight. And if you don't, I'm going to have your husband killed." So the wife, reluctantly, to keep her husband alive, she went to bed with King John. Of course, she wasn't there willingly, so she just didn't take any part in it. In the morning, the king would go into um, the parliament or into the palace, and he'd say to everybody there, "Oh, last night I slept with Baron so and so's missus. She's a terrible lay." Do you know what I mean? So
How
the
do we
Baron,
how do we actually know that
well,
he
because it's
did
all
that?
recorded in history. It's all recorded in history.
Okay, all right.
King John was a very nasty man.
Well, yes, I think most people get the fact that he was.
So basically, at Magna Carta, and then because King John was coming down too heavily on the common man,
Right.
when the barons persuaded King John that he had to meet them at Magna Carta, word got out at Runnymede. Word got out about that, and thousands upon thousands of the common man grabbed their bows and arrows and their swords, and they all trekked off to Runnymede. So basically, we now have a meeting of what they call the Estates of England. The Estates of England is where you have a meeting with the Lords Spiritual, which is the bishops, the Lords Temporal, which are the barons, and the Commonalty of England. Now, this is our highest law-giving authority. It overrides Parliament, it overrides kings, it overrides everybody. It has the ability to hire and fire kings. Did that when we effectively fired James II and hired William and Mary. But at Magna Carta, that was a meeting of the Estates of England. Rules were laid down, and the king was told, "You want to leave this field alive today, then you agree to this. And if you don't, then you're a goner, and we'll get somebody else."
Yes. Again, that's more threats and menaces. I mean, the whole thing is threats.
It depends on how you look at threats and menaces. People are saying what you are doing is wrong.
Yes. No, I absolutely. And they're trying to
don't change. If you don't change,
yes.
and in fact, we're going to take action against you, which you won't like.
Yes.
Now, I mean, basically, at the end of the day, the society the way it is, it's very nice if society worked well and everybody was lovey-dovey with everybody.
But I said yes. No, I get that.
That's not
but
human
what
nature.
you're describing, and you have eloquently described a number of cases or situations in history, which have resulted in different laws being passed or traditions and customs, etc. But of course, I was interviewing Sir Julian Rose yesterday, and he was talking about Wat Tyler and the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. And that was interesting because the peasants said, look, you're taxing us too much. And incredibly, without mobile phones and the internet, they managed to rise themselves together en masse and marched up and caused chaos and mayhem in London. And unfortunately, I say unfortunately, I wasn't there, so I don't know quite the situation. But Wat Tyler was murdered by the so-called leaders of the day in Smithfield. And if you look in France at the moment, we can see people are rioting because the powers that be are trying to, again, enforce stringent rules and regulations which have been produced through threats and menaces. We see that with the Dutch farmers. We see that with the Canadian truckers. We see that the people ultimately have had enough. And when you oppress people, they will rise up. Now, in Britain, we haven't had a peasants' revolt for a very long time. I feel like we're very close to it.
About 350 years.
Yes, fair enough. So that's a long time. I mean, it's not in my lifetime. But the stuff that's going on at the moment is making, I feel, people question whether whatever events have happened in history, whether that is intrinsically right for people, whether they're poor or rich, to live cohesively together. And so even though we've got these laws that have been built up and these statutes and all these rules and regulations, as you say, by these people twiddling their thumbs and have got nothing else better to do than to think up ways to sort of fleece us with more money, which seems to me what's going on, at the behest of bankers who seem to be in control, and very strange rules and regulations in which you lose the title to your car when you register it with the DVLA, so that the police can say, well, it's not actually your car, because if you look at your logbook, it says you're only the keeper and it's not the actual owner. So then they have, remarkably the right to do that. We're clearly in a situation in which trying to define what is law, as in a right of everybody, has got to be defined, because everything's not working. And
if we take the case of the policeman and your car, you see people are going on about the police abusing their authority, and John Harris was the one who started telling everybody, if you are stopped by a policeman in your car, you're not to give him any information at all, because if you do that, he owns you, and he would, he can do what he likes with you. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I mean, I've stopped an awful lot of cars with some cracking good-looking girls in, and I wouldn't have minded owning them for a couple of hours, but it doesn't work like that.
I'm just going to say, can you just give us the qualification for that? Why would you be stopping them? I know you told me before
there are a number of reasons why you'd stop a car. You'd stop a car because it has defective lights.
No, I don't mean that. You told me you were a special constable before. That was the bit that I just wanted to add in, so that it gives you credence to what you're saying.
Well, special constables are exactly the same as an ordinary policeman.
Right.
They have exactly the same authority. They have exactly the same.
Why are they special then?
What?
Why are they special then?
Well, special constables are basically our original police, who were volunteers.
Right.
Before there was a paid police force, there were volunteers. Like the tidying man was the volunteer, who was elected, and he had to uphold the law. And special constables, we had special constables before we had paid policemen. And basically, when a police officer stops a car, he stops it for any number of reasons. You've got defective lights on your car. He doesn't like the way you came around the corner on two wheels. He is just stopping it for a vehicle check to make sure that all the documentation on that car is correct. All of which are good reasons for a policeman to stop a car. And surprisingly, there are a lot of people are arrested because of random stops for various reasons. Because once you stop them and you talk to them, then in fact you get a suspicion that something's not right. So like the two traffic policemen on the motorway, they'd stopped an estate car, didn't like the way the driver was talking to him. He was very evasive and everything else. So he decided to take it a step further and stop his car and search it. When they opened the boot of his car, there were 200 weight of cocaine in the boot. So, there are all sorts of reasons why you would stop a car. Once you've stopped it, you talk to the driver. There are all sorts of reasons why you would want to take that more and further than just the stop for the car. Now, every policeman, they stop a car. What he wants to know is, do you have a license to drive it? Is it your car, or have you nicked it? Is it insured? If it needs it, does it have an MOT on it? And why the hell have you just run over the vicar? That's all the policeman wants to know. There's nothing at all about contracting with you at all for any reason. Now, memory serves, Section 136 of the Road Traffic Act 1988 says that if a police officer stops your car, a police officer in uniform, and this is the difference, if a police officer in uniform stops your car and he asks for your details, you are required to give them to him. Now, if you don't do that, you are liable to arrest. Now, I never saw it was part of my job to make life difficult for people other than just because they were stupid. So I would arrest under Section 25 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, name and address not known or believed. That's not a criminal arrest. We take you back to the police station as soon as we know who you are. Then we send you on your way, and we'll get you a summons in the post for whatever offence it was that I stopped you.
Why can I just ask, because you've had this experience and I've not had the opportunity to ask a policeman or an ex-policeman, why? The number of questions. Firstly, let me just start with this one. You hear of citizens' arrest and a police. Is there any difference?
There's a vast difference. A police officer can arrest on suspicion, right? So if
and who gives them that power?
The law gives them that power. You and I give them that power.
Right.
So basically, a police officer can arrest on suspicion. Citizens' arrests are really quite a dangerous thing to undertake, because In
I,
order
I
to make
understand that, but but are they allowed to do that?
Oh yes, you can do that, but um, the difference is that whereas I, as a police officer, can arrest on suspicion,
Mm.
um, you, as a member of the public, can't. In order for you to make an arrest, you have to know that a crime has been committed, and you have to know that the person you want to arrest has committed that crime. So, if, for example, you're walking down the road and you see two people the other side, Harry and Frank, and all of a sudden Frank stabs Harry in the stomach, then you've seen that. You know it's illegal to stab him in the stomach. You can then chase after Frank and you can arrest him and hold him for arrest for that. You can, if you want to, surrender your prisoner to a police officer, which is the normal thing that you would do, because that
Yes.
makes life easier for you.
Well, I don't
You
know what else you'd do with him.
you just make a witness statement and go to court and give evidence. Or you can say to the police officer, no, it's my arrest, I made it, I want to do all the paperwork, I want to do everything else. Difference with that, of course, is that you don't know what the paperwork is.
Right.
In this day and age, there are what they call MG forms, and you have to fill out these MG forms, and there are about, I don't know, 20 odd different forms you have to fill out every time you make an arrest. Every time you make an arrest, even if it's a simple arrest like a drunk that you're charging, drunk and disorderly, then in fact you have to fill out these forms.
Yes.
You'll find a form. They'll find a form in there that says, is he, basically, does he represent a threat? Do we want to keep him under arrest? Do we want to keep him in detention? Now, I've filled those forms in and I've said, yes, that there's every reason to believe this man will do a runner, etc., etc., etc.
Yes.
You then put the forms up. It goes to court. The magistrates then send him off on bail, and that's the last anybody sees him. I did that with a drink driver. He had a 20-year flagrant disregard of the Road Traffic Act. He was currently serving a 5 and a 10-year ban when I stopped him. He was wanted on a warrant for failing to appear on another drink drive charge. And I filled all that in on the form as to why he should be retained in custody. The magistrates let him go. And the next thing you know, they send me a billy-do through saying, well, he hasn't turned up for court, go and arrest him.
Right.
So I wrote across the form in red ink, double underlined and bracketed it, you lost him, you find him.
You're describing there a need and a reason for a police system. I'm trying to get to the
no, there's a definite need for a police system.
Yeah, no, and I'm not arguing that. I'm trying not to argue at all. I'm just trying to ask questions and understand. So the other question I wanted to ask then is, you mentioned about you have to give information when you're arrested, or when you're questioned rather, if you stop the car. Could you explain why that you have to, and why is silence then? Because you see people saying no comment. There are
a lot of cars out there which are being driven, which are stolen.
Yes, I understand.
And the object of the exercise is to get that car back to its owner without it being unduly damaged.
Yes, and I would want that if it was mine.
There are a lot of people out there driving without a driving licence. Obviously, they're not considered safe under the law to let on the road because they haven't passed the test. There are a lot of people out there who drive without insurance.
Yes.
So if they run you over, they're not going to stop and
recompense.
hang around, because they're going to take it on their toes because they don't want to get.
I accept all those reasons.
So there are lots of reasons, and in order to determine when you stop a vehicle, in order to determine whether or not you're going to allow the man to go away with words of advice or a summons or whatever, you need to answer certain questions. You need to make some inquiries.
Yes.
So you do a name check. You get the man's details off him. You do a name check. The PNC will come back and say, well, this man's wanted on a warrant for failing to appear, or he's wanted on a warrant for burglary, whatever it is, in which case you arrest him, which comes to the point of wet signatures on warrants that we hear a lot about. What normally happens with a warrant is the court issued a warrant. It then goes to the warrant office in the courtroom. The magistrate or the judge has signed the warrant with his wet signature. It then goes into the office. They then fax the nearest police station to that person's address a copy of the warrant. So when you come on duty and you're all there, notebook, pencil, truncheon, and all that, and the inspector will say, "Who's on 5 beat tonight?" And you say, "I am, sir." And he'll say, "Right, nip along to the collator's office. There's a warrant in there. Go and arrest Jeffrey Brown from 35 Acacia Avenue for failing to appear or for whatever it is." And so you go along. You don't have a warrant with a wet signature on it.
No. But when you're on the roadside, what I was trying to get to, we were talking about, you have to ask for information. If they don't supply who they are,
yeah,
you said that you can arrest them.
Yes, absolutely. And if you're not,
so you don't need a warrant then at that point?
Oh no. If you're not happy with the way the man's talking to you, if they're evasive or whatever, then it's up to the individual constable to decide what he does about it.
Right.
Now,
I suppose I'm just trying to get to this silence bit. If you refuse to give, you feel very polite and very kind. You say, "Thank you very much. I appreciate you stopped me because of the light and all those things, whatever it is. But I'm not going to give you my name and number."
You get arrested.
And why is that so?
Well, because you're obstructing the officer in his execution of his duty to detect offences.
Even though
he's asking you the questions to find out whether you're entitled to drive that car, whether it's stolen, whether it's insured or whatever. If you don't tell him and he can't check, or if you give him information that he believes is a bit moody, then he can arrest you under either Section 25 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act or for obstructing an officer in the execution of his duty. Now, I had a lot of people contacted me after they'd been to John Harris's talks, and they say to me, "I need help." And I say, "What happened?" And they say, "Well, we're driving down the road in my car. Policeman stopped my car. He asked me for my name and my details. I told him I'm not prepared to tell you those, and I'm going to, I'm just not going to tell you because I don't want to contract with you and I don't want you to own me." Eventually, the police officers got fed up with asking, and he's arrested them for obstructing an officer in the execution of his duty. Perfectly valid arrest. And they go to court. Now, obstructing an officer is actually a criminal offence. So I would say to them, you've been reading the John Harris book of sheer fucking lunacy, haven't you?
Please don't swear on the channel.
Yeah. But they'd say yes. And I'd say, right, well, all you can do now is go for damage limitation. Go and find the policeman that stopped you. Tell him you're really, really sorry you wasted his time. Tell him that you just had a row with a wife. Most policemen are married. We know all about that. And you wanted to kick something, and unfortunately, he was the first one you came across. If he's a halfway decent bloke, how he gives his evidence in court depends upon whether you get a £150 fine or a £350 fine. So all you're down to is damage limitation. But, I've stopped cars in the street. I was out puppy walking with a young officer under training. And I said, "Come on, you've got to stop a car." And he said, "Which one shall I stop?" And I said, "Just stop any of them." And so he walked out into the road. He stops the car. It's come in. He's talked to the driver. He's looked at the tax disc, which was a beer mat. The driver's then been arrested. The car has been a wreck. It's been cut in half. It's two cars welded together. Not safe to be on the roads. And one of the two cars that it comprised was stolen. So, from just making an ordinary little stop, just to do a vehicle check, a name check, we end up with an arrest with 2 or 3 different offences, and that's what policing's about. It's a lot of it is following your nose, really. You look at it and you follow it and you say, "Well, I'm not entirely happy with this. I'm going to dig a bit deeper." And so you dig a bit deeper. Now, you can find some quite serious offences. Some officers will always go for the worst offence they can find. I never saw it was part of my job to make somebody's life more unpleasant than it needed to be.
Indeed.
just because they were stupid, you know?
So yeah, and you said that before, and I take that as you say. So it's interesting because we're in this discussion, which has been really interesting, and thank you for being part of it. You can see that with common law or with certain rights like the Bill of Rights, let's take that as it's sort of more in legislation rather than in principle, that you can see that we in society or communities, we need a system in which there's certain rights that we all have, inherent rights, inalienable rights that, like thou shalt not murder, that sort of thing, or steal from people and all that. And we also then need a system in which that can be policed so that it prevents bad people from doing bad things and they can suffer the consequences, potentially in a trial by jury type situation where the community is deciding what is right, not necessarily elites in inverted commas. And then you need honest people, and we hope that the police are these honest people carrying out certain duties on behalf of everybody else, which you've also said that's where the power comes from everybody else. It seems that in the modern society, all of this seems to have got very corrupt now. And we have dubious practices from people and dubious laws being
it's gone tits up, hasn't it? The whole system has gone tits up. I see on the internet, I see loads of cases quoted of police officers doing things wrong, and some of them, you look at it and you think, yeah, that is wrong. I would swift him for that. You know what I mean? We've got the commissioner of police saying I've got, about 300 officers that shouldn't be. I've got about 160 of them who've got criminal records for serious offences who shouldn't be there, but I can't sack them. I wrote to him and I said to him, look, if you feel these officers really shouldn't be police officers, sack them. Doesn't matter whether you've got the authority to do it or not, sack them. You'll get the backing of the public for that. But,
that is it. That is the core thing, isn't it? It comes back to the public.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the police are supposedly policing by consent.
If you sack a police officer who has, for example, got a conviction for sexual assault, now no members of the public want a police officer like that. So just sack him, get rid of him, sack him.
Right. But you can't have it both ways, can you? You can't say, here's legislation, I'm going to arrest you, and if you don't tell me who you are or say anything, I'm going to arrest you. And then at the same time, you can't have the situation in which, we don't like you, we're going to sack you.
Well, so police officers have to have a higher, it actually says it in the training, you have to have a higher moral
compass than others
else,
and
right?
Clearly so I've got to pull this to a conclusion, if I can. It seems to me that where we are, that we've had systems that have worked. There is some sort of underlining principle. We've had to have, as I outlined just now, some sort of legal department that we all accept in order to have rules that people can live by. These rules seem to have been extremely corrupted. We've seen that with the government pushing things that nobody actually wants and MPs not actually representing their constituencies. We've seen police out of control in which they're not actually doing the job they ought to be. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And it's usually from the top down rather than the people on the beat, as it were. And so it seems that we appear now to need a root and branch beginning of all of these things, in which we go back to first principle and saying, well, what is first principle? Is it natural law that we all have these inalienable rights? And start that process again with building a witan of reliable people who will then represent everybody, and start again. Because where we've gone through this whole journey that you've described to us with the historical aspects is that there's nothing concrete anymore that's good to build on.
No, this is true, and Parliament is going to think. I had a thing with my member of Parliament. I petitioned Parliament in 1609, in May 1609. I think on the 9th of May 1609, the House of Commons passed a resolution that any commoner can petition the Commons for anything at all, and the Commons have to hear the petition. What they do with it once they've heard it is up to them, but they have to hear it. So I petitioned the Commons because there were a few MPs like Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, and one or two others I didn't like in positions of authority. And I asked them, basically, I would like them to sack these people, get them out of Parliament, out of their posh jobs, um, on the grounds that they're not suitable people for it. Now, I sent that to my member of Parliament. I put it on the internet, like I do a lot of my stuff. A lot of people thought, what a great idea. And they wrote to the Speaker. The Speaker wrote back to them and said, well, you have to write to your member of Parliament about this. But I'd written to my member of Parliament, and I heard nothing else. So I went along to one of his surgeries and I said, I wrote to you and asked you to put this petition up. Have you done it? And he said, no. And I said, why not? And he said, well, because now I'm in Parliament, I do what I like, not what anybody else wants me to do. And I said, so what you're telling me is that on the 9th of May 1609, the House of Commons passed a resolution saying that I, as a commoner, can petition the House of Commons, and the House of Commons have to hear that petition. And he said, yes. And I said, and you are saying I'm not prepared to put that before the Commons, so you're breaching the Commons resolution. And he said, yes. Now I'm an elected member of Parliament. I do what I want, not what anybody else wants.
Yes.
Even if it breaches parliamentary rules.
Which clearly shows that the whole system is completely broken. And
we
see that so many times in which an MP can stand...
Let me tell you about Parliament. If they're discussing something in Parliament, they cannot have a vote unless there are at least 40 members of Parliament present. If that's just for ordinary communal guard and everyday voting stuff, right? If there is something which is of national importance, say, for example, like the COVID vaccines and their value, if there's something of national importance, or arming Ukraine, that's of national importance because we're likely to end up with an ICBM up our backsides. Then the Commons, when they discuss it, they cannot vote on it if there are just 40 members of Parliament there. In something important, of national importance, 40 members of Parliament who are there have to then issue a writ to every other member of Parliament ordering him to come to Parliament.
Yeah.
So it can be discussed with a full Parliament. Now,
is that happening?
What?
Is that happening?
No, of course it's not happening.
No.
If you look at Parliament today, or on the television programs, Parliament Today, you look at it, you've got half a dozen people there rabbiting away to an empty house, haven't you?
Yeah.
And yet they make decisions on that.
So do you think that if different parties came in, there's the Reform Party, for example, that's third.
I think
would it make a difference?
I think I think initially yes, it will, but it's been my experience of life that if you give the common man authority over the common man, then he can't help crapping over the common man from a vast height.
So exactly. So that it's interesting you say that, because that really gets to the crux of the fact that we started there with the conversation in which we've voted in a king.
Yeah.
We've had the historical thing, and basically, in your words, each one has crapped down on the common man.
Well, not every.
No. But you did highlight that. You said if you give the common man a power over the common man. I know. You said that, and it's true that
we've been fairly lucky with our kings, because the majority of our kings have been.
Yes, I appreciate that we've been lucky. What I'm saying is, generally, it seems that unless you apply the law equally to everyone, that no man is above the law.
Yeah.
As soon as you start putting people above the law, which you might argue
but our kings are not above the law.
Well, in theory, but you've already said that a policeman.
No,
now, hang on a minute. You've already said a policeman has the ability to be above the law to somebody else who wants to stop.
No, he's not above the law. He operates with an authority granted by the law.
Right,
but that's the same thing.
Well, it stops somebody from walking away from a policeman or not giving his name.
It's not the same thing. Now, if I'm a police officer in uniform, I stop a car, I'm allowed to ask certain questions. If I don't get the right answers, then I can take that further in whichever direction I decide to take it. If I'm a police officer and I'm walking down the road and I stop somebody, and I say to them, what's your name? They're quite entitled to tell me to get lost, because they're not in charge of a mechanically propelled vehicle.
Right.
Okay. If I let them drive off round the corner, they're not going to run off and kill a dozen people. Do you know what I mean? So there are differences as to what you can do.
Yes, and I have I'm acknowledging that we need a system of policing that gives people that we've got to sort of keep people safe and all the things that a policeman are supposed to. So I'm acknowledging that. What I suppose I wanted to end the conversation with, because we've explored a number of issues along the way, is that we come back that the system we have at the moment is undeniably broken, and it's penalising ordinary people.
It's absolutely destroyed.
And that we as the people of this country and indeed the world need to come together and work a better system, find a different way in which we can still remain equal in the law, but have a mechanism that can police and keep people on the straight and narrow and protect those people who are under attack from others.
The mechanism that we have is a police force, and basically, if that police force is doing its job properly, we wouldn't have a problem, because nobody in this country is beyond arrest. Now, you cannot arrest Parliament. You can't.
Why?
You can't prosecute Parliament.
Why?
You can't. Well, because Parliament is just a palace of Westminster with a lot of people in it, isn't it? You can't do that. What you can do is you can arrest everybody in Parliament as an individual.
Yes.
You can arrest everybody in Parliament as an individual.
Well, there's a lot of those that ought to be arrested for crimes against the state.
I asked the police if they would investigate Hancock, because I couldn't see that the way that contracts were awarded for COVID vaccines and PPI and stuff like that was a fair and reasonable way of doing it. I thought that it was very definitely going to be a case of, if I give you this contract, how much are you going to refund me?
What did they say?
Profits. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Did they come back to you?
No, they didn't.
No.
But, I ask them all the time. In fact, police have now told me, Cressida Dick's staff officer told me, they're not going to answer my letters anymore.
Right.
But all I'm asking them to do is uphold the law. Now, in the case of the Maastricht Treaty,
well, we haven't got time, unfortunately.
Okay.
But I appreciate that you're a thorn in the side of the authority, and I don't think it's wrong.
I try to be.
Yes, I don't think there's anything wrong in questioning things that are corrupt or not right. And I very much appreciate your time on this. We've been nearly at an hour, so I want to bring it to a close before then. But Albert, thank you so much. It was fascinating to have this debate, and I wanted to bring it to the viewers because we've been talking about, I suppose, very principled things about what's right and natural law, God's law, common law, and now you've given us a version of common law using legislation and case law and all of that, which has been fascinating. But also to have that insider information on how policing has worked and where we are at the moment. And let's hope we can find solutions, because we're going to need to do something, because at the way things are going, it's all in the wrong direction, and the poor common man seems to be under the metal much more than ever before.
What we have at the moment in the police force is a lack of the moral courage to do what is right, irrespective of the personal backlash that's going to come against you.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
A friend of mine did what was right and changed the law of England, although he risked his job to do it.
And more people need to stand up to do exactly that.
Absolutely. More people need to do that. They need to stand up. More people. I write a letter to the Commissioner of Police. I put it on the thing. I hope other people will write the same letter in their own words and send it to Commissioner of Police, because in a lot of cases, public pressure works. And if enough people do it, then the Commissioner of Police is going to have to look at this and going to have to say, well, I can't go on ignoring this, because it's going to backfire on me.
Exactly.
And it's a sad state of affairs where you have a senior police officer who's worried more about it backfiring on him than actually doing the job he's paid to do.
Yes. Well, let's hope more people will put pressure on those people in authority. Albert, it's been absolutely brilliant to chat to you. Thank you so much for that. I hope the audience have enjoyed our conversation. It's taken some interesting turns, and I have been quite sort of questioning on it, which I normally sort of sit back and let the people go, but I wanted to delve a little bit deeper, so I hope
No, that's fine.
that was all right. So
Yeah.
there we are. I'll be back again with some more interviews on the channel very soon, but meanwhile, from Albert and I, goodbye.
Bye.